and welcome. I am Tootight Lautrec, the Mistress of Glitterature Alley, and here we are once again at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainder section of an unnamed local library which may or may not have two lions couchant on the front steps, paying attention to all the wonders, great and small, in their world. Welcome to Glitterature Alley, where I am late. I am late for a very important date for Jane Austen July, because by the time this goes up, it will no longer be July. But I am going to be talking about the group read for the 2026 Jane Austen July, which is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. And if you want some other discussions about that, you can go to, I think it's on Roz's channel, where Roz and Tilly and Sean's friend Kathleen have an ostentatious video about Mansfield Park, and I'll link that below. Or you can go to Katie's channel, Books and Things, where she talks about 10 reasons to read or reread Mansfield Park. And I'll link those below, and I'm sure you can find many other places too where other people are speaking about Mansfield Park. But before I begin, I will tell you there will be spoilers. I'll try to keep some things vague for those of you who have not yet read it, but because I'm going to be reading as a reader and also reading as a writer, I'll be pulling back a little bit from the immersive experience of pure reading pleasure, and I'll have to light upon some events that occur in the novel so that I can talk about techniques that Austen uses and try to get some of the magic that she has as a writer. So, Mansfield Park is the first novel that Jane Austen wrote in what are called her mature years, but which they mean after she turned 30 years old. Drafts of Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice were written, she had wrote those in her early 20s and then revised and published them later. And Northanger Abbey was the same situation, where she wrote them in her relative youth and then published them later. But then came Mansfield Park, and after that came Emma and Persuasion. And it strikes me as strange that Mansfield Park came just before Emma, because they are so different, but they both have flawed heroines in them, or what I think some people might call flawed heroines. So it's a very curious piece, Mansfield Park. It's a very unusual heroine in that Fanny Price is neither sassy, snarky, sarcastic, or assertive, but she is quite stubborn about her sense of values. So she's a quiet watcher of events, and she's more of a watcher of events than she is a force that drives the plot toward a crisis of any sorts. So not only is she a character who does not change, as we so often hear that, successful characters in novels should do, change by the end of the book. She's not only a character who does not change, but she's a character who stays the same steady good girl she has always been all throughout the book, while everyone around her changes. And it's fascinating to watch this quiet watcher of a heroine, someone who pays attention to the wonders that are in her world, which of course I love. And she's at the center of all the roiling, dysfunctional family that is the center of this book. The story, roughly, goes like this. Fanny is one of 9 children born to a woman who foolishly married for love and ends up being poor. Fanny's mother has 2 sisters, Mrs. Norris, who married a clergyman, which is a member of the gentry, but it's not as high as one could go, but it's certainly not as low as someone who marries someone in the armed services is, and ends up being disabled and quite a drinker. That's Fanny's father. And then the second sister is Lady Bertram, who marries very well. She marries a Sir Thomas Bertram, and they live at Mansfield Park. And in order to relieve the load off of Fanny's mother and her, ever-growing family, they decide to take Fanny into their home. The Bertrams decide to take her into their home at Mansfield Park and raise her as their own from the age of 10 until about the age of 18. And most of the book takes place while Fanny is 18 years and older. So even though she's taken into the family, she is she's still an outsider. She's a poor relation. She's taken in with 4 other children who have many more advantages because they are the real children of Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram. And she's raised as a poor cousin, but she's still treated very well. 3 of the 4 Bertram children, who are now adults for most of the novel, are spoiled and selfish and silly, and the one sensible one, Edmund, is the one that Fanny becomes quite enamored of, and she develops feelings for him. Then 2 outsiders arrive in the neighborhood of Mansfield Park. Charming, attractive, fun, funny, but a bit loose morally, and their characters could use a little bit more character, according to Fanny. And these are Henry and Mary Crawford. So, let the games begin. As a reader, I was drawn in, as I always am by Jane Austen, by the family dynamics and by Austen's humor, and by the deft strokes that she uses to delineate character in just a few sentences. And then when we meet them later on and they are in dialogue, then she sort of develops them even further, and they stay close to the characteristics that she describes at the very beginning. So we learn that Sir Thomas Bertram is somewhat stern and reticent. We learn that Lady Bertram is, quote, a woman of very tranquil feelings and a temper remarkably easy and indolent. And this bears out later in the novel. And Mrs. Norris, the one who married the clergyman, had a spirit, this is described at one point at the beginning, she had a spirit of activity which could not be satisfied till she had written a long and angry letter to her sister about her poor marriage at the very beginning of the book. So they stay pretty much true to their characters, but they expand as they go along in the ways in which they interact with Fanny and with one another. So as a writer, I wanted to get at how this complex novel works and why it works so well with such a subdued heroine, because you would think that the heroine should be the star of the show and she should drive the action, but that's not what happens here. And I realized that as a reader, I was drawn into the intrigue of all of the love triangles that occur almost like a French farce in this novel. There's Mr. Rushworth, who will marry Maria Bertram who loves Henry Crawford. Henry Crawford flirts with all the women, but accidentally falls in love with Fanny, who happens to love Edmund. Edmund loves Mary Crawford, who at first thinks she should love the older brother, Tom, because loving an older brother, the firstborn of a baron, is really where the money is. But as the jigs and reels go on, she actually does fall in love with Edmund, and despite the fact that he wants to be a clergyman, which has a much more paltry income than the eldest son who will inherit the entire estate. So Fanny is the center of all this, quietly watching, quietly yearning for Edmund, weakly rebuffing Henry Crawford, and quietly hating Mary Crawford, not just because she knows that she and Edmund are having a flirtation and possibly will end up being married, but because she recognizes that as fun and funny as she is, she's a bit flippant and she has no real principles or characters that keep her grounded, and Fanny does not like this. So the patient, silent, good girl heroine gets what she wants in the end, but there are obstacles, namely that the man that she loves somebody else, and that he happens to be her first cousin, which in a lot of marriages in the 18th and 19th century is quite common, and it is legal in England for first cousins to marry. The fear was that there would be a lot of genetic abnormalities, but studies have lately proven that the possibility of that is maybe only a few percentage points more than if the two were not married at all. So at the very beginning of the novel, it's considered a prohibition, but by the end of the novel, given everything that happens, everyone's quite happy that Fanny and Edmund are together. So one other thing that I've been fascinated about in general in everything that I read, I'm always fascinated to see what a writer does at about the 3/4 point in the novel, in a novel. Usually there's some crisis of sorts that needs to come, something that needs to propel the action to a close. And I realized while thinking about this book in particular and Jane Austen in general, that when things seem to be spinning out of control, and particularly in this novel because there are so many casts of characters and there are so many love triangles and everybody's swirling around everybody else, so many things are changing, Jane Austen tends, when this happens, to make someone very, very ill. And this ends up whacking the people who are sort of out of line into place and back into their senses. So this happens when Marianne is ill in Sense and Sensibility. This happens in a little ways with Harriet, with her mild illness in Emma, and it allows Mr. Elton to make advances at Emma on her own. But Harriet's illness is critical to that, so that they can be alone. Louisa Musgrave's illness and concussion in Persuasion brings the main characters together. And Jane Bennet's sickness in Pride and Prejudice leaves Elizabeth Bennet over where Darcy and Bingley are, so that they are much more incongruous with each other than they would be ordinarily. And here in Mansfield Park, it's Tom's illness that knocks some sense into him and brings Fanny back from Portsmouth to Mansfield Park. She has been sent to kind of gather her senses at her old poor home by Sir Bertram, and she's summoned back when Tom is ill, and this sets everything going to the final culmination of the book. So I just found, I don't think that it's a trick that she used purposely. I don't think it's something that she had up her sleeve that she fell back upon, but I just happened to notice that this is something that happens. There does need to be a crisis in a novel that makes things come together at about the 3/4 point, so that things can either wrap up or, go kablooey altogether in every which direction. And I just found it quite clear, quite interesting that it happens here as a sickness again in Jane Austen. So that's just something that I gleaned while I was thinking about how this novel works. In the end, everyone comes to their senses except for Fanny, because Fanny had never left her senses. She had her senses all along. She's the one constant, and it's a very interesting way of creating drama by using a character who's quite non-dramatic. And it's funny that Jane Austen said about Emma that this is a character who nobody but myself will like. And in fact, it seems like a lot of people think that Fanny Price is a big drip, and that is their main problem with Mansfield Park. But I think it works very well because it creates, there's all this drama around this still center, which is Fanny Price. So, a character who pays attention to all the wonders, positive and negative, in her world will always win me over. Because, as we know, the world is full of wonder. Pay attention. Until we meet again, I am Tootight Lautrec.